We'll cover how to insert and filter a pivot table from an existing set of data. First, let's define what is a pivot table. A pivot table is a summary of your data minimized into a smaller table for reporting or analyzing. And so when it comes to pivot tables for me, I always try to get an understanding of my data set prior to inserting my table so that I can properly determine the best way to sort or filter my information. Let's take a look at the data you see here. This looks to be a sample inventory order. Here we have apparel type, quantity, size, color, cost per unit, the vendor that is supplying the apparel, ship date, and payment type. And so we're going to start with our first scenario. We want to see the total quantity of units per vendor. So we're going to insert our pivot table. First, we will highlight our table, making sure to include any headings so that you can properly filter the pivot table. So we'll start with A1, drag over to H1, and then all the way down to row 19. Next, we will go to the Insert tab, and then Pivot Table. Then we will select from Table Range. Once you select that, a dialog box will appear similar to what you see here on the screen. Since we've highlighted our data source, the field from table range has defaulted. So as you can see here in this light gray highlighted box, that tells us that we've highlighted our data set. Next, Excel will prompt you to choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. This option is based mainly on preference, but I will show you both ways. If we leave the default to new worksheet and press OK, so I'll go ahead and we'll leave our default to new worksheet. We'll press OK. As you can see, a new worksheet was created with the outline of our pivot table. Now, I'll show you the other option. So what we'll do is we'll right click and delete this worksheet. We'll go back up to Insert, Pivot Table, from Table Arrange. Now we'll choose Existing Worksheet. Okay. Now, when you choose Existing Worksheet, you'll have to manually select a cell range within your existing worksheet to add your pivot table. So what I'll do is I'll come over here and I'll just click a small section. So as you can see where it says location, that's telling me that it's within this box. So this is where my pivot table will be once I click OK. And so we'll go ahead and click OK. Now, as you can see, it inserted the pivot table in our current worksheet without having to go to a new worksheet. And so when determining when you should add a new worksheet or add to an existing worksheet, I think it all depends on your data set. So if you have hundreds of lines of data, adding a new worksheet would be best. If you're working with a small set of data and have enough white space, similar to what you see here on the screen, then adding to the existing worksheet will work for you as well. So we've inserted our pivot table, and now we have additional options, which are called pivot table fields. So here to the right, where it says pivot table fields, as you can see, we have apparel type, quantity, size. That's why it's important when you're grabbing your data or when you're highlighting your table to make sure that you grab any or headings or titles, because the headings and titles of your initial data set will determine your pivot table fields. And so underneath our pivot table fields, there is this quadrant at the very bottom with 4 different sections. So you have filter, columns, rows, and then values. So filter allows you to sort your pivot table by a specific data point. If you select columns, your data will be placed in columns. Same thing for rows. Your data will be placed in rows. And then values will always calculate a total. So regardless of what you put, anything that you put here, it will calculate a total. Let's pick out our keywords from the request. That would be total quantity and vendor, which means that these are the 2 report fields that we need to focus on. So what we'll do is we'll start by selecting the vendor first. So you'll go to the report field, locate vendor. Now you can either click click the checkbox, or you can drag. Okay, so in this case, what we'll do is we'll just keep it simple and we'll just click vendor. Now, do you see what happens when we clicked vendor? Now we have discount sports, hats and things, and outdoor apparel. If you ever click out of your pivot table report fields, you can just click back into it and it'll show it for you. So you click out, it disappears, you click back in, now you are able to continue on. Now we have our vendor. And so next, because we said our keyword was quantity, because that's where we wanted to see per vendor, next you'll select quantity. And so Excel is smart enough to recognize numerical values and has defaulted our quantity fields to the value sections of our quadrant. Remember, values will always calculate a total. And so here's the answer to our scenario question. We can now see all totals by vendor. We have discount sports, 225, hats and things, we're expecting 120 pieces, outdoor apparel, 240. Let's do another scenario. Now we want to know what is the apparel type for each vendor of what we will be receiving, okay? This second request will take our existing pivot table to another level. What is our keyword in the second scenario? If you selected or chose apparel type, then you are correct. Now we will select the apparel type pivot table field. And now we have additional detail into our pivot table. So now we can see what we're receiving per vendor along with the total.